Hey guys, what is up? It's Fred Barton again here, and in this video I want to tell you why I left the UK 3 times, why I'll never go back there, and why you need to leave as soon as you can as well. But for those of you that are new here, my name's Fred Barton. I used to be a foreign policy analyst and interpreter for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in the embassy in Beijing in China. I then became a digital nomad in 2015, and I've been traveling abroad and doing online business since then. So I'm actually filming this video from sunny Bangkok today, and we'll come on to that topic later, why living in places in Thailand is so much better than living in England. But before we jump into any of that, I want to give some background information, because I know a lot of people watching this channel will say, oh, well, it's fine because he's from London, he was born with a silver spoon in his mouth, it's fine for him to go and live abroad, XYZ, yada, yada, yada. And actually none of that is actually true. I was brought up in a very small, isolated village in the countryside in the UK near Gloucester, which is in Gloucestershire. My parents were relatively poor, low middle class people. My dad was a special needs teacher, my mum was a primary school teacher. My mum had a nervous breakdown when she was 48 and had to quit working early. My parents had 3 children. They were on relatively low wages, so there wasn't money in the family. We had various problems in the family as well. My brother was a heroin addict and he died when he was 26. So I just wanted to dispel any of those notions that you have about, well, this is just some rich guy from London and it's fine for him to jack in his life in England and go and live abroad like a little prince. Because I've seen some of the comments like that on previous videos, and that's just not the case at all. So a little bit more background information as well. I was very lucky in 1997 to actually be invited on a trip to Indonesia. My family generally never took holidays abroad. Usually there would be 5 of us in a caravan in Wales or Dorset or something like that. And I got this lucky opportunity when I was 16 years old. We had a family friend who was quite wealthy, and the husband of that family was an engineer in Borneo. And instead of flying back to England, because he didn't particularly like England, the family would meet up for family holidays in Bali. And my friend's brother was doing his A-levels. He couldn't take time off to go on this trip. The hotel and everything had been booked. So my deal was, if I could rustle up enough money to get a plane ticket, they would pay for my hotel in Indonesia, in Jakarta and Bali, and I could spend a couple of weeks over there with them. So this was a lucky break for sure, but I also worked a lot part-time, which meant that I had the money there to actually pay for my plane tickets anyway. I was working a lot part-time from the age of like 15 onwards. So that put me in a position then to take this first trip over there. So this was a really life-changing event, because I was 16 years old, and as soon as we touched down in Jakarta, my eyes were open to a completely different way of living. I'd never seen the expat lifestyle before, and here were guys who were like 20 years older than me, living this incredible life. A lot of them were engineers and quantity surveyors and stuff like that, jobs which I wasn't suited to because I didn't actually have a scientific brain or anything, a mathematical brain. But anyway, I was blown away by seeing the quality of life that these guys had out in Indonesia. I went to Bali and just like fell in love, completely fell head over heels with that place, the whole tropical nature of the island, everything about it. So I knew from the age of 16 that I wanted to get out of England, because when I went back to England after this trip, the whole place just looked very dull, very depressed, very overpriced. There was no good beaches like I'd seen in Bali. There was just the community and the happiness and stuff of the people wasn't there. So I got this eye-opening epiphany at the age of 16 that there was a much better standard of life and just a better way to live and a happier way to live abroad, with good weather, good beaches and more community, and people just seemed a lot happier. Life was more colourful. So from the moment that my mind got open to that, I was always set on setting myself up abroad and leaving the UK. Okay, so let's flash forward to the year 2004. This is actually the first time that I left the UK. And at this point, the Labour government under Tony Blair, they had brought in a lot of reforms. And as I said, my parents were teachers. So for us as a family, it was generally positive because teachers' wages went up under the Blair government. And that was very helpful for our family. But one of the downsides to the initiatives under Tony Blair was to popularise higher education. So by the time I graduated, a degree had been completely devalued. Everybody had a degree, and you basically needed to get a master's degree to get into the workforce. So I left university in 2004, and there weren't jobs for fresh graduates. So I was lucky enough to get on a teaching scheme to go and teach English in China. So this was the first time that I left the UK properly, and I went to China just to live for 1 year. I had no interest in China whatsoever. I just saw it as an opportunity to go and take my holidays in Indonesia, which was a country that I knew that I loved. So I was just seeing it as a stepping stone to get over there. I never envisaged that I would stay more than 1 year, and I ended up staying 10 years on and off after that. But this did also kind of set the scene for a common pattern throughout my life, which was I invested all this time in high school, in college, doing A-levels, and then university, and then you get out there and the UK just could not provide for me. And this is what has happened time and time again, and which is why I've lived in so many different countries, because your home country of the UK just generally is not even welcoming or doesn't offer you jobs or a good standard of living. So this was like the first kind of taste that I got of that as a fresh graduate at the age of 21, of like, okay, so I invest all this time, all this effort into the system, getting myself educated in the UK, and there's actually nothing here for me. So then I went over to China and things started to turn out really well there. I was treated extremely well. This is why I'm always grateful to China, because they gave me so many lucky breaks and great opportunities. And I'm not a shill for the Chinese government. None of my content is paid for by the UK government or Chinese government. I'm a completely independent commentator. I just talk about my own experiences. But my life in China from 2004 to 2015, when on and off I went back to the UK to get my master's degree in 2010, but it was fantastic. Okay, so from 2004 to 2010, I was in China. I was teaching English and studying Chinese, and by the year 2010, I'd got myself up to postgraduate standard, and I came back to the UK to do a master's degree. And this was when I got my second kick in the teeth from the UK. I spent 6 years learning Chinese, teaching myself Chinese, worked my absolute guts out to do that, saved up all this money from teaching kids abroad, and came back to the UK, paid this money to the University of Bath to do this postgrad degree. Everybody has said, don't worry, you know, we know you're 30 years old, you haven't really had a break in life yet, you know, you haven't made it yet, but you've put all this effort into learning Chinese. Once you get this master's degree done, the world is just going to open up for you. The world's going to be your oyster. China's the next big thing. Everyone needs Chinese. It's going to be amazing. So I just kept laboring away with this idea in my mind, right? So I did my master's degree 2010, graduated in 2011, waited for the oyster to open, waited for the world to just be at my feet with this new qualification, because, you know, I had my undergrad degree and that didn't work, but now I've got my master's degree, so surely this is when I'm going to make it. And my reception to that was David Cameron in the Conservative government had completely slashed all funding for interpreters and had put everybody on 0-hour wages. So you were basically pimped out on a pay-as-you-go basis. And I was doing interpreting in the National Health Service, for the Home Office, for migrants, Chinese illegal immigrants. And I would do calls at the holding centres that they had there, and I was being paid like pennies basically for my work. It was no contract, it was a pay-as-you-go basis. So I would drive an hour over to the hospital, do an hour of interpreting, drive an hour back, and make £20, and I'd spent £10 on fuel. So I do all that work for £10, and this is as a Mandarin interpreter. This is meant to be a high-level skill. Even the doctors in the NHS were like impressed by my skills and would say to me, oh, it's really amazing, how did you learn Chinese and all the rest of it. So I just felt completely let down again by the UK. I was very, very disappointed. At this point, I spent 6 years slaving my guts out learning Chinese, got to a level where I was now a professional interpreter, and there's no jobs for me because David Cameron's just basically completely devalued the profession. So I ended up on the dole as well because there just wasn't enough work. So I'm sitting there, 31 years old, soon turning 32, with a master's degree, and I'm signing on the dole. And it's just, I couldn't believe it. I never imagined that would happen. And this is when I started to get embittered against the UK, because I just felt that I was just getting kicked in the teeth every time I tried to get a start in life there. So finally, after sitting in a shared house on the dole, extremely depressed, I did manage to get an internship. And this is when, again, China saved my ass, because I got an internship in Beijing. And this is why I'm unashamed about saying that I love China, because they've saved my life twice. Once in 2004 when I couldn't get a job out of university as an undergraduate, and the second time when I couldn't get a job out of university as a postgraduate. So I just remember touching down in Shanghai in 2011 and just being so thankful to be back on Chinese soil, because there was nothing for me in the UK, and I had tried and tried. I ended up on the dole as a highly skilled worker, and I mean, how can you not feel embittered and, you know, disowned by your own country when this happens to you? And everything is so expensive. You know, you've got dole money, and it was basically enough to buy some hash browns and a couple of frozen pizzas and just live like a slob, and, you know, just keep looking for work. So I was just so thankful to be back in China. So that was the second time that I left the UK. And the third time that I left the UK was recently. I'd been living in Japan for 3.5 years, and I went back to visit my family in 2023. And this is when I got another massive shock of what the state of the UK was like. There were no eggs in the supermarket because they were rationed. It was like going to some third world country. There was just huge potholes in the roads, which I've talked about in other videos. People were depressed. I went to London, and it was just a completely dystopian, post-apocalyptic type vibe there. So many fake candy shops, which were, I learned later, they are fronts for Albanian gangsters. They're just an inordinate amount of candy shops which don't make any sense on Oxford Street. There were beggars lying around, which I'd never seen, like the number of that around. I saw drugs being dealt in broad daylight, and people told me that we'll send you a drugs menu on WhatsApp, and then you just order, and then a guy on a delivery bike, which, you know, like a Deliveroo or an Uber Eats, he will pull up and just give you drugs in the middle of the day. There's no police around. There's kids with Rambo knives and zombie knives stabbing each other up. Like the London just looked completely lawless. I've got friends who would never wear their watches in London or anything like that. They live in London. They told me that they would now never wear their watches in London because it's too easy for them to get cut off your wrist by gangs. So I was back in the UK to visit family, and yeah, after a little while of this, spending all my money on fuel and shrinkflated groceries, if I could get the groceries that I wanted, if they weren't on ration, when there's no eggs and the shelves are half empty. So yeah, after a couple of months being back in the UK, that was plenty enough for me. And then I decided to move back to East Asia. I moved to Taiwan, I moved to Vietnam, and I'm currently on a break here in Bangkok right now. And I just don't understand why people would subject themselves to living in the UK. To be honest, I'm not totally negative about the UK. I know in the summer there's basically no better place to be really than the UK. The vibe and everything is different. But just in terms of bang for your buck, what you can buy with your money, I don't understand really why people would live in the UK. It's a grey, miserable country, people are extremely depressed, and our once revered standards for quality and a lot of the things that we did well have now basically gone. And I think we're looked down upon, as is Europe and the West, a lot by East Asia, and we're just seen as a pretty slovenly, dysfunctional country. So there's just so much of a better quality of life that I can have living abroad. And people, this is not a relative comparison. There are people in the comments on my other videos saying, oh, but it's not fair for you to say Vietnam's a good country to live because you're not a middle class Vietnamese person, they can't afford healthcare. That's not my point. I'm not talking about what it would be like to live in Vietnam or Thailand as a lower middle class Thai person or a Vietnamese person. I'm talking about as an English person with UK wages, which I can earn online. Why would I not spend that in a country where I can get way more for my money and have a way better quality of life? I'm not talking about a relative comparison. I don't know enough about normal life for lower middle class Thai and Vietnamese people. People completely missed the point in my video. I'm talking about the quality of life you can have by arbitraging the power of your dollar or your pound. So to wrap things up, basically, yeah, I left the UK 3 times. The first time after doing my undergrad and finding that there was no work because you now needed basically a master's degree to get into the workforce because Tony Blair had devalued the power of a undergraduate degree. Second time, that was in 2004, second time in 2011 when I graduated with a master's degree, and there was still no jobs for me, so I ended up going back to China, and I had to start on an internship and claw my way up from there, and luckily I managed to end up getting a job in the British Embassy in Beijing, which I worked very, very hard for to get. But I had to work from clawing my way up from an internship where I was working alongside 21-year-olds who were fresh out of university, and I was a 31-year-old man, nearly 32 years old. And then the third time I left UK, which is the time that I've left for good, was just recently in 2023. Went to visit family, was shocked by the state of what was going on. Everything was so run down, dystopian vibes in London, and the whole place just looking very run down, forlorn, badly taken care of. All the hedgerows overgrown because the council said they don't have money for that. Potholes everywhere, rubbish not being collected like for weeks at a time because there's no money for rubbish collection. Just have no idea what is going on in the UK with the amount of money you pay on council tax and all of that stuff, and where is it actually going? So as I say, for me it's just a no-brainer. I enjoy living in places where there's a better climate, where people are generally more laid back and happy. So that's why I don't live in the UK, and that's why I recommend that other people, if they can, should live abroad as well. So that's everything for this video. Check out the other ones on the channel, and I'll speak to you soon.